Nobody saw it coming. This European country joins the war. For over 200 years, Sweden was an example of neutrality in a world frequently shaken by conflict. However, recent events in the Baltic Sea and its accession to NATO have led the Nordic country to a historic crossroads that challenges its identity as a peace-loving nation. Today, Sweden faces a reality that is no longer limited to a hypothetical scenario. A war that is not conventional, but whose shadow hangs over its territory and its people. The term hybrid warfare, which a few years ago might have sounded like an abstract concept, has become part of everyday vocabulary in Sweden. This type of conflict does not involve pitched battles or troops advancing across borders. Instead, it manifests itself in acts of sabotage, cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and attacks on critical infrastructure. A recent example has been the damage to submarine cables connecting Sweden with its neighbours, disrupting key communications and exposing the fragility of systems that, until recently, were considered secure. Sweden's entry into NATO in 2024 marked a seismic shift in its foreign policy. For decades, the country remained neutral, relying on diplomacy and its geographical location as a natural barrier against conflict. But the war in Ukraine and growing tensions between the West and Russia transformed the landscape. Joining NATO was seen as a necessary act to guarantee national security, but it also represented the end of an era of strategic independence. This move, celebrated by some as a step towards greater protection, has also been criticized by those who fear that Sweden has sacrificed its legacy of peace. The sabotage in the Baltic Sea has set off alarm bells. An emblematic case was the damage to a submarine cable connecting Sweden with Estonia. Although the details about the perpetrator remain uncertain, public opinion and the media have pointed to Russia as the main suspect. Swedish authorities responded by sending warships and reconnaissance aircraft to the area, marking the first military action of its kind in decades. What for other countries might be a routine measure, for Sweden represented a historic change. The government has also taken internal measures to prepare its population for this new reality. Leaflets with instructions on what to do in case of war have been distributed massively, reminding many of the Cold War era. In addition, mandatory civic service has been reinstated with the aim of training citizens in military and emergency tasks. These decisions, although justified by the current situation, have generated an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty, especially among young people, who now have to face a threat that their parents and grandparents did not know. The official narrative highlights the need to adapt to a world where the rules of the past no longer apply. According to Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, we are not at war, but neither are we at peace. This seemingly contradictory statement reflects the complexity of the moment. Sweden, a nation that had built its identity around peace and neutrality, must now deal with a global environment where security is no longer guaranteed. In this context, hybrid attacks pose a crucial question. Who is behind them? Although Russia has been identified as the main actor, there are also theories that suggest the involvement of other countries or even non-state actors. The sabotage of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, initially attributed to Russia, ended up involving pro-Russian forces and Western countries, according to subsequent investigations. This precedent has led many to question official narratives and to call for more thorough investigations before blaming a single actor. Meanwhile, the Swedish population faces a dilemma. On the one hand, the fear of an escalation of the conflict is very real. On the other hand, there is growing concern about how these measures will affect the essence of their country. Sweden was always seen as a model of peace, a place where international disputes were resolved at negotiating tables and not on battlefields. But now, with warships patrolling its waters and a population preparing for the unthinkable, that image seems like a thing of the past. The central question is, what does this change mean for the future of Sweden and the world? Is this an inevitable step in an increasingly divided world, or is there room for Sweden to reclaim its role as a mediator and defender of peace? The only certainty is that, at this moment, the country is at a turning point, and the decisions it makes in the coming years could redefine its role on the global stage. Sweden, which once stood on the sidelines of conflicts, now finds itself at the center of a geopolitical chessboard full of tensions and uncertainties. The peace that defined its history for 2 centuries seems to have been left behind, and what comes next is an open question, full of risks and possibilities. Today, a country that for more than 200 years was synonymous with peace and neutrality has taken a historic turn. Sweden, known for decades as an example of international diplomacy and peaceful conflict resolution, now faces an unprecedented threat, what its authorities call a hybrid war. This concept, which until recently sounded alien in the Swedish dictionary, is now the center of political, military and citizen debates. What is this hybrid war all about? It's a confrontation that does not take place on traditional battlefields, but in virtual economic and social spaces. The strategy includes sabotage, cyber attacks on key infrastructure, massive disinformation and damage to critical infrastructure, such as the submarine cables that connect Sweden to the rest of the world. The Swedish Prime Minister, visibly distressed, recently declared, "Although we are not in a conventional war, neither are we at peace. Our country is under attack." These words, delivered at a special press conference, marked a turning point in the national narrative. Sweden, which had remained on the sidelines of world conflicts even during the 2 world wars, now finds itself at the center of a crisis that redefines its role in the international community. The most recent trigger was an incident that alarmed not only Sweden but all of Europe: the sabotage of submarine cables that carry essential data for international communications. In a world where information travels through these technological arteries, any disruption can have catastrophic consequences. The cuts affected not only Sweden but also neighbouring countries, creating a domino effect on the global economy and communications. "This is a deliberate and calculated act," said the Defence Minister, suggesting that a foreign state with hostile intentions could be behind the sabotage. In response to this situation, the Swedish government has taken measures that just a few years ago would have been unthinkable. Patrols have been stepped up on the maritime borders, the defence budget has been increased, and most surprisingly, talks have begun to accelerate Sweden's entry into NATO. This last point has generated intense internal debate, as many citizens believe that joining a military alliance could end their tradition of neutrality. It is an unprecedented situation for us. What is at stake is not only our security but also our identity as a peaceful nation, commented a political analyst on a national television program. The world is changing rapidly and Sweden can no longer afford to watch from the sidelines. However, crucial questions arise. How prepared are Sweden and its society to face these types of threats? What will be the long-term impact of these decisions on its economy, politics and culture? And most importantly, is there a diplomatic solution to prevent the situation from escalating into a major conflict? For now, the future of Sweden is written with uncertainty. A country that for centuries was synonymous with stability and neutrality is now at a turning point that could redefine its place in the world. Hybrid warfare has not only reached its shores, but also the heart of its national identity.